industries. Like the more time I spend using AI, the more comfortable I am, the less anxious I am, the more I realize how it works and how it can help me in my day to day. Whereas I think, like you said, his examples like, oh, people are just using it for
The
writing
blogs and
marketing copy.
yeah. Yeah, exactly, and those are the superficial things. I'm sure if you listen back to our podcast that we spoke about in the early days, because they were the simplest, most obvious ways to generate content. It's just as people have worked out the other capabilities that we are seeing the excitement around that, and I think that our constant cry is we just need a bit of time to see all of the best ways this can be applied. Some it's bad at, some it's really bad at, some it's really good at, and we're going to discover that it will improve, we will improve, the paradigms we use to interact with it will improve, and it will become more and more something that people are used to, like you're describing.
I just think the overarching problem for people like Gary Marcus is that AI has a usability and interface problem right now that no one's really identifying, or maybe they are and I just am not seeing it, but they
Oh,
just
I
don't.
agree. I agree. And something we're going to talk about later today is using open source models like Llama 2. And the work I've had to do to get it going and understand how the different modes in which it can operate and the different ways you can interact with it. There's a lot to that. And I'm a programmer and I'm someone who's really obviously really into this stuff. And it still took me quite a while and a lot of hours working on it to be able to get to a point where I understood how to use Llama 2 properly in a way that could be used similar to OpenAI or Anthropic. And so I think that you're right. It's an accessibility thing. Not everyone can just go and use like Llama 2 uncensored and just see what it's capable of. It's not that simplistic. And so yeah, I think that there's a long way to go on that side of AI for regular people using it and industry people using it and seeing what they can do with it.
Yeah, it's sort of like comparing it to the internet being just invented and then saying, well, where's the like the
Well, I mean,
meta.
the internet's a great comparison where, you needed to have a modem before, you needed to have POP software, you needed to be able to connect, like set up all the DNS settings. And there was this in the early days of the internet, there was a lot to it if you wanted to get involved at the sort of genesis level, prior to sort of like AOL and all the big ones coming out with pre-made stuff. It wasn't it wasn't that accessible.
Yeah, and I think also at the moment there's the limitation we've spoken about around hardware. Like just getting server availability to test some of this stuff is near impossible.
I've
Like,
literally been stalking Lambda Labs to try and get access to a H100 because, they sort of come on and off. I need like one of those eBay sniper software to actually get one. And I've looked into the other ones. Like there's another one called Paperspace, I think I mentioned last week, but you've got to go through an approvals process to try and get the highest servers. And their highest servers are A100s. They're not even that good. So it's really, really tricky. And then if you want to buy one, which I'm always looking into, you're talking $24,000 to $30,000 just to buy an A100. That's not even a H100, which you can't get anyway. So the accessibility of hardware in terms of individual or small business experimentation is a real issue. I mean, it's not, we talk about it because we're into it and it's interesting to talk about, but when you actually try and do it for real, you encounter the problem immediately.
yeah, and I think until a lot of this stuff sorts itself out, which there's industries literally being built around that Gary Marcus thinks are duds, you cannot realize like not only the money to be made in potentially building these tools like the Lang chains of the world, but also just how this technology gets deployed, not only through existing apps, but apps that we in theory can't even fathom today. Like we just simply can't. Like I talked last week about feeding a Claude, like, the whole accounting course in Australia, and then asking it questions like it was an informed accountant. And, that's like it's not even a tuned example of using this thing. And it was able to credibly answer accounting questions. And I just think that that's quite a hard use case to do
I
without being
mean,
able to
just
code
that
today.
that alone, the synthesis of large amounts of information into understanding. And I know that some people will question the use of the word understanding. Does it really understand it or whatever? But Look, if it can answer questions about it, it helps my understanding. So I'm happy with that. And I think that that use case, when you show that to people who've never experienced this before, you take a huge amount of information and ask it a question and it can competently answer it in like less than 20 seconds, sometimes even faster. It's that alone, there's so many possibilities just in that single use case and it works great. Claude 100K is amazing, and I know that people in the audience don't have access to it, and I feel bad for you about that because it really is quite remarkable. But also, you don't necessarily need that to do it. There's obviously LangChain, like you just mentioned, using embeddings and searching the text, getting the summaries, and then answering questions on that works almost as well. So that use case is enormous, and I think that even if that's all that came out of generative AI, um, and I mean, really, is that generative? That's understanding. That's not generating anything. It's generating the answer, but it's not really just completing the next token, as the naysayers would say.
But it still brings me back to the interface problem because if I'm a listener now who listens to this show and can't write a line of code and doesn't even know what LangChain is, and I know there's a lot of people that do.
So much respect for the audience.
No, but it's
I'm
true.
sitting in the gutter with a bottle of wine, and I just want to use AI, but I'm too stupid to do it.
But no, I mean, like honestly, it's still incredibly hard. Like to recreate that accounting example specific to Australian accounting law. In my case, someone's got to go to like ChatGPT, pay for code interpreter, upload like 50 legal PDFs. And then query it, but oh wait, it doesn't have the large enough context windows, so now I need Claude, but I can't get access to
Yeah, and that's actually a good point because then I would just say use LangChain, but then it's like okay, now you can't.
Yeah, but now you've got a code. Like there's a true interface / usability accessibility problem here, and like again, back to Gary Marcus, you know. This idea that saying it's a data not living up, it's like, how can it ever live up to expectations until...
Yeah, and actually that's a good point because what he's saying is that, okay, ChatGPT usage is declining as the bubble. He keeps talking about bubbles of bubbles. The bubble goes down, but that's because people aren't actually able to use these more advanced use cases through there. And that isn't the fault of generative AI. That's perhaps the fault of ChatGPT not building up their accessibility tools and product on top of their good models.
Or it's just a stupid, misleading data point because it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere and school kids and universities that were mostly using it and people learning how to code are on holidays and don't care.
Well, yeah, I've never really trusted that metric. I don't think that it's indicative of the enthusiasm for this technology at all.